podcast once again. I'm Peyton, alongside at this time Drew. I'm sure plenty of others tuning in as things go on. Drew, how's it going?
Good man, what's up?
Living the dream, or living La Vida Loco, as that one song goes.
Oh yeah, there you go.
I don't know where that came from, but I think I'm going a little mad, and it's probably because of March Madness.
Right?
That's something we were going to talk about last week, but obviously never got around to it, just like in
Right.
typical We Like Sports podcast fashion.
Got a little distracted.
Right, I forgot what we were talking about, but obviously that distraction lasted for a while.
Yep.
But
Basically an
regardless,
hour.
yeah, per usual, 7 to 8 o'clock, We Like Sports podcast, basically an hour.
Right. Basically an
But
hour.
but I guess from the March Madness point of view, we'll get into that today. I'm gonna give the rest of the guys about 10 minutes or so to get in,
Okay.
and then we're gonna end up diving into that. But I want to talk about after we ended up finishing up the podcast last week. We were talking about Tony Romo, Tom Brady, both of them doing commentary, everything like that. Next thing you know, news wise, is you end up hearing about stuff throughout the week. Phillip Rivers might be interested and expressed his desire to return to the NFL. 49ers, Dolphins were looking into him at one point. Tom Brady was talking about coming out of retirement, but his kitten might be holding him back because his daughter has a kitten now, and that's what he was saying would end up holding him back. And then other reporters were saying something along the lines that, well, maybe he's just fooling all of us and he's coming out of retirement, which was also a year ago today, March 13th, 2023. A year ago last year, he was coming out of retirement.
Right.
Um, but so many things news related. And the last thing is there's possibility of Odell Beckham Jr. coming back to Cleveland once again, which
Maybe.
it would be
I think there
interesting.
were 14 teams at his workout. So
Yeah, but Cleveland being one of them after the breakup that they did have, that's where things got interesting. And it just goes to show you what's true is with the NFL and with the Browns, obviously there was an issue, and that was Baker Mayfield
right.
or management or whatever at the time. There was an issue, though, and it makes sense who that issue was because otherwise I don't think Odell Beckham Jr. is coming back to the Browns or even considering it, even if there is teams at his workout. I mean, that's a thought that he's at least expressing somewhat of an interest that he could be interested in coming back to Cleveland following the terrible things that happened in the past.
Right. Well, and if you look at the list of teams that were there, both of his former teams, other than the Rams, were featured. So, being the Giants fan here, the Giants are interested in him again. He's interested in the Giants. He was last season, come right before the playoffs. He was talking about the Giants, the Cowboys. There was the whole battle of who's going to get him before the playoffs. Um, both the Browns and the Giants have now both teams have completely different systems than when he played for them. Other than I think Odell caught like the beginning of the Stefanski era, but he was with Baker Mayfield. But Odell's tenure in Cleveland, the majority of it was not with the current coaching staff. Um, Obviously, he wasn't thrilled with the play calling when he first got here. He wasn't thrilled with his usage while he was here in Cleveland. And now they have a new quarterback. The majority of the coaching staff for his tenure is gone. And it seems like maybe he sees something different in the organization that he'd even be willing to talk to him. But I'm not sure how real his interest is in Cleveland versus how much it's a story that's being blown up here because they attended his workout. Because obviously all the New York sports outlets are like, you know, what are the chances that Odell ends up back in New York? They're all doing the same thing because anybody who attended his workout is going to be a potential landing spot for him.
Right, exactly. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't end up going to the tryouts to begin with.
Right. So I don't know. I think he's got a lot of interesting options. The problem is he's coming off an injury. He missed an entire season to rehab because of it. He had some rough seasons before that. Whether it's him, whether it's Baker wasn't finding him when he got open. I mean, I don't. I'm sure everybody's got a different opinion on what the issue was. Um, I don't know what really is all that different, or what teams are willing to gamble on Odell coming back, because the issue with the Rams after the Super Bowl, he said they're not offering me enough. Well, you just tore your ACL. What do you expect them to offer you? You
Right.
know,
Yep.
you scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl. You were serviceable at the end of the season for him and the playoffs. But other than that, we haven't seen anything from Odell in years. You
I
know,
mean,
his best years were back in New York,
yep.
and he was unbelievably good. And he looks jacked right now. Like, he's in really good shape right now. But is he as good as he used to be? Who knows?
So let me ask you this then. As a Giants fan, and obviously watching the Browns have Odell Beckham Jr. in the past and having higher expectations, even not being a Browns fan, but an AFC North competitor with being a Steelers fan, I'm interested in seeing how Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be, how he's going to play. And when he came to Cleveland, he just seemed like he was very out of it, so to speak. Like he didn't fit in, he fit out, which was without a doubt, whether or not that was Baker Mayfield or not. But the thing is that like the thing that I could be critical of Odell Beckham Jr. about is I feel like he's just had one good play in his career, and that was that play against the Cowboys. Like he had one spectacular catch, and outside of that, he's just kind of an average
Well,
wide receiver, like an average dude, just because that hype didn't exist in Cleveland. Like his watches and everything along the lines of that existed, but at least from like his play, he didn't have any stunning plays like you saw before, like his one major highlight play that you see, which is that going over in the end zone, falling backwards, one big
yeah,
catch.
the catch against the Cowboys. I mean, that's obviously the big highlight. But as somebody who watches basically all the Giants games, I mean, Odell's first 3 years in the league were the best of any receiver in the NFL since Randy Moss, until Justin Jefferson just pulled the same feat. So he wasn't just one catch. I think people forget just how dominant Odell Beckham was as a rookie in his second and third year. Before he came to Cleveland, I mean, the reason the Odell trade was so big wasn't because of his one catch. I mean, this is a guy who turned a 5-yard slant into a 70-yard touchdown. This is a guy who made who knows how many one-handed grabs out along the sideline. I mean, were they all in the category of greatest catch of all time? No, but he had hands similar to Randy Moss, where Randy Moss has a couple highlights that are the greatest catches of all time, but he was doing that so frequently that those got overshadowed by the ones that were unbelievable that no one else was going to make. I mean, Odell, when he came to Cleveland, I was told repeatedly by my friends that are Browns fans that the Giants got ripped off. That getting an offensive lineman to
Yeah,
do that, they got ripped off. That wouldn't have been the case if he had made one spectacular catch and was averaging 300 yards or 500 yards a season. This is a guy who was putting up 1,100-yard seasons consistently with Eli Manning at quarterback. I mean, it's not like it was some guy that was throwing for 5,500 yards, right? I mean,
right.
he was with, I would say, an above average quarterback. I mean, Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers are basically the same quarterback, minus Eli having 2 Super Bowls. So
And
he had,
Phillip Rivers having 10 kids.
well, yeah, uh, and yeah, and Phillip Rivers not walking out into the sunset without, Eli, when he retired, he was retired. Phillip Rivers, maybe not. Um,
Right.
but Odell, I don't know if he'll come back to Cleveland. I don't know that Cleveland wants him. I don't know that the Cleveland fan base wants him back after what he pulled on his exit. I mean, it was ugly. I mean, it was uglier than the stuff that was going on in New York. In New York, he was fighting the kicking net. In New York, he was diving headfirst into Josh Norman's helmet. So he had his attitude issues and his kind of antics in New York, but it wasn't to the point where his dad was sending videos of Odell is
Yeah.
open and you're not throwing to him. I mean, he really went at Baker Mayfield pretty hard on his way out. And as much as I don't think they should be, Cleveland fans for some reason are obsessed with Baker Mayfield. Getting rid of him for some reason is still some awful thing to talk about even though he's below average at best.
And also, how about the fact too that you mentioned Odell Beckham Jr. and the Rams? What if it ended up going down to the fact that he was healthy last year and they crossed paths again when Baker was the quarterback for the Rams for the last couple of weekends and Odell Beckham Jr., if he would have been healthy, that would have been I guess, the telltale sign that who could have been better was like the organization. Could it have been the Browns organization if they both would have succeeded in Los Angeles? But obviously that didn't happen, and we're talking about what ifs, and that's never going to happen. But I
Right.
guess the next question about Odell Beckham Jr. before moving, I guess, to Phillip Rivers, because you did kind of mention it, and I kind of want to segue there. And with that being said, though, with Odell Beckham Jr., once he ended up having his highlight plays, he ended up having good numbers in New York. Do you think he's just kind of at the point in his career now that the money has gotten the best of him? Like his ability, he's not at the same ability that he earned. He got paid, so now he doesn't care, and he still has the standard that he wants an unreal amount of millions of dollars just to compete 1 or 2 years with whatever football team. But I feel like he's already reached his peak and his pinnacle with being a wide receiver. He got his payday, and he's kind of down his downhill spiral of his career. It seems.
Yeah, I don't know that he's done. I mean, he looks like he's in good shape. He's had a year off from an ACL injury. It's not, ACL injuries used to be career enders. They're not
Hmm.
anymore. I mean, we saw Adrian Peterson come back and run for 2,000 yards basically the year after an ACL tear. So it's not the debilitating career-ending injury that it used to be, but I think we're gonna find out what he's worth when these teams start making offers to him. It's not a great wide receiver market this year. There's not a ton. It's a wide receiver heavy free agency this year, or it's a running back heavy free agency this year. There's not a ton of receivers out there, so teams that want to improve got to find somebody. If his workouts, if he looks like he has the hands and he could be a number one or number two guy on some of these teams, he might be worth a contract, but I don't know how much money I spend on a guy with so many question marks. And I think he
Right.
has this expectation that he's now a household name. Everybody that watches football knows Odell Beckham.
And if you don't, it's just because of his antics that were on the field too. I mean, everybody in Cleveland, if you didn't even watch football, you knew he wanted to wear his watches on the field because that's his statement. He wanted to wear his kind of cleats because that's his statement. That's his
Right.
personality. That's him, which is understandable. I'm not knocking the guy for wanting to express himself and being just a football player that's expressive. I mean, that's back in the day, back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. Everybody had their own way. Look at basketball. Look at Dennis Rodman.
And
Like everybody had their own way.
but it's one of those things where for Odell, I like Odell. I don't have any issues with Odell as a football player. But every time you make yourself a spectacle, you have to expect the stuff that comes along with it. There's this feeling around a bunch of athletes, and Odell included, where I'm going to say and do whatever I want, and if you come at me or you don't like what I'm doing, now I'm a victim because it gives the attention back to him. Um, Odell's not putting up great numbers and he has health issues in Cleveland. What does it become? I'm a victim because, the system is keeping me down and I'm not playing well because Baker's not throwing me the ball. Was he partially right? Yeah, Baker was not good and was not good at getting the ball to their best playmaker.
Yep.
At the same time, making a video of all the times you were open and got missed is childish. And if an organization doesn't want you because that's the kind of locker room cancer you are, so be it. Terrell Owens was the same way at the end of his career. I mean, Skip Bayless called him team obliterator for the last 3 years of his career. And it's not because he wasn't I mean, T.O. is one of the top 5 receivers of all time. But teams were wary of bringing him in because he went after Donovan McNabb. He went after Jeff Garcia. He went after, he fake kind of stood up for Tony Romo, but I think that was like trying to save face at the end of his career. Um, Odell's kind of putting himself in that category of everywhere I go, there's some kind of attitude issue.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely like you said with the video from his dad that ended up create a highlight reel of how many times my son's been open and how often he was missed. It was definitely ridiculous, and definitely it was one way or another. The fact that both of those guys were out, you saw who was telling the truth at the end, but that was definitely a blow up, and it
Oh,
was a
and
breakup
let's
that
not
nobody
pretend.
wanted to see.
Let's not pretend that Odell didn't know that was happening.
Oh yeah,
Odell
it was
100%
approving of that
gave his
too.
dad the okay to do it, and it was a method that Odell used to get the trade he wanted out of here.
And
But
that would
why
be
would
really
Cleveland take him?
surprising if they did take him back. Yep, if they did, that would be really surprising, especially after all that did happen in the past. I
Right.
would agree with you on that. But changing gears though and going over to Phillip Rivers, and speaking of fathers, the father of 10, Phillip Rivers, wants back in the NFL because food's just been so expensive apparently now, and the cost of living has gone up, so supplying 10 kids has been complicated, I guess. But jokes aside, he ended up reaching out or in contact with the 49ers and the Dolphins. And Tom Brady was said, I think it was Rich Eisen ended up saying something along the lines that Tom Brady is thinking about coming out of retirement. He was looking at schools in Miami. If those two, one of the two of them, I think I could see coming out of retirement regardless. It's just who. I'm not going to say Tom Brady's out of the question, but I think Philip Rivers would have the better chance at coming out of retirement and playing. If he goes to the 49ers, I think you definitely have a shot with Tom Brady going to the Dolphins then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna look. I forgot how old Phillip Rivers is. He's
37, 38, I
right.
could guess.
Well, actually, he's 41 according to
Oh,
Wikipedia.
wow.
So I didn't realize he was that old.
It's
But
the years at the Colts that end up adding on extra years on his life, apparently.
right. I mean, look, it's one of those things. Phillip Rivers was always good, right? I mean, I don't think there was ever a time where I was like, Phillip Rivers is the greatest quarterback. I don't think there were times I said Phillip Rivers is a top five quarterback. Um, Phillip Rivers was good. He put up numbers when he needed to, and the Chargers were good when he was there. I mean, he wasn't the reason they lost games, and he likely wasn't the reason they won a lot of games. I think he was a great game manager. And like the intelligence side of it doesn't leave you, right? I mean, I'm sure there would be some kicking the rust off, but Philip Rivers was always smart. He wasn't a turnover machine. Um, but it's one of those things where these over 40 quarterbacks, I don't know why teams, I don't know why the 49ers would want him. I don't know why the Miami Dolphins would want either of them. They have there's plenty of quarterbacks on the market where you can get multiple years out of them. I get wanting a veteran presence maybe for a year, but how much is a veteran presence worth, and how much of a cap hit do you have to take to have a guy who didn't want to play 6 months ago?
Yeah, that's very true. And a year before that too, and it was on a sour note because it was the Colts and it didn't end his career the right way. Maybe that's even part of it too, because he has better teams that are contenders now, like the 49ers, like the Dolphins that do have interest that if it was a shittier team, obviously he wouldn't want to come out of retirement. But I think
Right.
obviously a winning culture speaks differently.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for a guy like Philip Rivers who was so good, who got no no Super Bowls, right? I mean,
Yep.
he was good for that long, basically having his career compared to Eli Manning because of that trade at the draft, and
Hmm.
Eli being drafted by the Chargers and never stepping foot there. Philip Rivers was the other side of that whole incident, and their careers are pretty similar. Wins, losses are pretty similar. Yards aren't. I mean, Eli beats him in yards and all those accolades, but if you have a chance to go to a team that's studded, got tons of talent and a chance to win, I think it's hard to say I don't want the millions of dollars and a chance to, get a win before the end of my career. I mean, Tom Brady did the same thing. I mean, he leaves New England, he goes to Tampa, who's got a pretty solid lineup, a solid roster, and he ends up winning it. Did he need another Super Bowl? No, but
Nope.
he went to a team that had a chance to get one, and he got one. I don't know that I blame Phillip Rivers. I blame these organizations. I mean, there are serviceable quarterbacks that are available.
Yeah, I mean, there's really good backups in the past, but it's like you're going into the retirement bin or the clearance bin just
Right.
because they've been around long enough that their price tag has fallen down.
But
But I
has it?
guess you're right. But initially in that organization's mind, they're assuming that they could get this star player that has 3, 4 years past their peak. If not, they're 40 plus. Who knows? I mean, football, your average peak's what, probably like late 20s to like 33, 34, probably.
I think it depends on position. I mean, most running backs are cooked by the time they hit 30. Most
Yeah, right.
receivers, I mean, like 26 is old for a running back now. 26, 27. Those are running backs that aren't getting massive deals anymore. Receivers, it's a couple years beyond that. I mean, we just saw Adam Thielen get released. He's been around forever. Um, but 30 is probably the cutoff for receivers. Quarterbacks, I think they hit their peak in their late 20s, early 30s, but it's not a long peak. Um, there's very few Aaron Rodgers out there, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yep.
Aaron Rodgers MVP seasons in his late 30s. Um, and there's very few Patrick Mahomes where before they hit that age, they're already racking up the accolades. So I think quarterback's a hard position to know when somebody's gone over the hill, right? I mean, Ben Roethlisberger, you know, 3 years before his retirement was still a guy that was being drafted in fantasy leagues in the top 10 of quarterbacks because he was putting up
Yep.
numbers. But his final year, I mean, everybody was like, why did this guy come back for one more? He should have walked out last year. And they said it the year before that and the year before that because the decline happens fast. When a quarterback starts declining, that's it. It happens quick.
Yeah, and once one injury happens, that's when everything ends up crumbling and your whole entire career comes falling down then just because like being a Steelers fan, being a fantasy football player too as well, every draft that I could, I'd get him in any draft I could get him in. And it wasn't really a reach either. It'd just be sixth, seventh round, maybe the fifth, first quarterback off the board. I'd take him all out of the first three just because, especially later in his career when he didn't have a great running back and didn't have the triple Bs, he didn't have Bell, he didn't have Brown, but he had like guys like Juju and Chase Claypool, guys that aren't there anymore. But he ended up having games that were 500 passing yards
Right.
all throughout, and then it was great for fantasy numbers. And I think in the years past too, I ended up mixing him with like a Derek Carr too, and now he's on the Saints, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Football, the landscape of football has been really interesting, and I guess to wrap things up with football, the 2023 season is going to be really interesting because Aaron Rodgers could be the next Packer quarterback that's on the New York Jets now, which
Yep.
the AFC would be loaded. It's absolutely ridiculous. You
The
have Patrick
AFC
Mahomes.
East is going to be unreal.
Well, that's what you got: the Jets, the Bills,
The
the
Patriots
Dolphins.
and the Dolphins.
Oh my God!
And it's kind of weird to think that the Patriots are the only team without a stud at quarterback. I mean, if Tua's back, Tua's that good. I mean, before his injury, I don't know how he's going to be after it, but before his injury, he was a top 2 quarterback in the league. I mean, he
Yep.
was lights out. But now you have Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers, who 2 years ago, Aaron Rodgers was an MVP. Like, let's not forget how good Aaron Rodgers has been.
You could also argue with Mac Jones too. It's just the last year didn't really give a great example, but once he got his rookie season, that start he didn't look terrible. But
No,
last year when you had Bailey Zappi and Mac Jones, once that became a competition due to injury, Zappi could have very well taken that starter position from Mac Jones. And this year's a prove himself year just because they could move on, they could trade him. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo signed with the Raiders on today.
yep,
3 year deal, and that means he's going to be a starter for probably 3 years until they draft somebody, or if they draft somebody. That guy's going to sit behind Jimmy G because I don't think they're signing him to a 3 year deal just for shits and giggles. I don't think
no,
that's a real thing.
yeah, I think so too. I think they said, look, You're going to be a starter. There's not going to be a competition out here. You're going to be starting, and you can't complain about lack of weapons. It's going to have Hunter Renfrow and Devontae Adams.
Yep, that
If
would
you
be
can't succeed
huge.
now, you're never going to succeed.
And you might have Jacobs at running back too, because I think has an option or he was franchise tag, but who knows how long he'd be
Yeah.
a part of that. But
Yeah, I don't know if
you have a good running back.
Yeah, I mean, they'll have a good running back one way or another. There's enough on the board. They'll get somebody.
Yeah, that is fair. Well, changing gears, hitting on March Madness finally. Did you fill out a bracket yet?
Yep.
You did already. I might have to be involved with that, depending on the price tag. But
I did a
this is
$20 one already. I do
see,
so. I'm usually in like 7 or 8.
I'll do 1 to 2. That's it. All the time in years past, I do 1 to 2 brackets, and one of those would always be. I mean, I watch college basketball a very minimal amount. I wouldn't even say a decent amount, a minimal amount.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the conference championship games, I'm intrigued. I'll watch them. Ohio State kind of surprised a lot of people, and I think they was unexpected what they did in the Big Ten tournament. But it's always this time of year, though, that when it comes to brackets, I can just look at it from a numbers perspective and know how history's been in the past. That 12-5 matchup, I'll take 4 out of the 4 teams taking that 12 seed out of the 5 and have that 12 seed advance just because in years past I've gotten lucky. I've gotten 3 out of the 4 of them right just because that 12 seed. The seeding doesn't make
Yep.
sense with March Madness, and I mean the best March Madness tournament that I remember the bracket, and I wish I would have had it right, was those people that had UMBC beat Virginia 16 versus 1 2 years
Yep.
ago or so.
Right.
But March Madness, I'm very intrigued. I have to fill out one of the brackets still. We were talking about possibility of a March Madness tournament or bracket challenge with We Like Sports podcast. So stay tuned for that at We Like Sports PC or WeLikeSportsPC.com. I don't know if we'll do money wise, but we might just do bragging rights and maybe have a guest spot on the show or something along the lines of that. But an idea. But
Yeah.
regardless, though, Oral Roberts, I heard that this year could be a pretty big surprise, though, just because of their talent. They have, I think, height between their forward and center. That's pretty astonishing.
Are they the one that matched
And
up with Duke? Or is
I
that
think so. It might be. Let me check. Let me
I
pull
don't
that
have
up.
I don't
But
have the bracket memorized by any means.
not yet. After filling out 13 of them,
I've only filled out one. That's why.
and you have all of them due by what? Thursday?
Yeah, I'll do them all.
Thursday at 12.
Yep. Yep. I'll have all 7 or 8 of them done by like
So
tomorrow.
will I end up figuring out what the matchups are, the surprising matchups? You end up letting the viewers know, and let me know too, because I'll be listening. What was the best finish, I guess, you had for March Madness history, and what was like the story behind it too? Because there's always like I always came from the Homer standpoint too, until probably within like the last 2 years. But if Ohio State was in that bracket, I would end up taking them until deep in the run. Like I interned for the MAC tournament in 2015, I believe, 2016, and that's all the MAC schools. You have Kent State, obviously, they're a part of it this year,
Yeah.
but Buffalo was the one that won it that year, and
Right.
Buffalo, I think, was like a 13 seed and facing a 4. Well, my dumbass ended up having Buffalo all the way until like the Elite Eight or Sweet 16 or something because I saw
Yep.
them live and I'm like, these guys are going to be absolutely incredible. They're going to be unstoppable. Their band's amazing. They're going to get the fans involved.
Yep.
Wasn't the case at all.
No. So I have Homer syndrome, but luckily for me, Syracuse has sucked the past few years, so I haven't had to worry about slumping myself into Homerville and getting crushed. Although being a homer with Syracuse when they do make the tournament is actually kind of fun because they do make those random surprise runs to the Final Four and Sweet 16s when they're low seeds. But on that token, the best I've ever finished, I won a bracket with like 200 and something people in it. I was 13 years old in 2003. I picked Syracuse to win the national championship against Kansas. I was the only person left that had a chance to win that had Syracuse. Every other person had Kansas that had a chance to win. And Syracuse ends up winning their only national championship. And I end up winning a whole bunch of money as a 13-year-old because Hakeem Warwick had the greatest block. And Carmelo Anthony and Jerry McNamara took Syracuse all the way. So that's definitely the best finish I had because I was being a homer and it actually worked out. But I usually fill out a couple different brackets in like the big tournaments. I'll fill one out that it's just taking a shot in the dark. I'll fill one out like, hey, this is the teams I actually think should win these games. And then I do the I gotta pick a random 12 seed to win. And I don't so I pick a random one. I pick a random like 13 seed to win. I do that stuff. And then if my team is in, I'll fill out another bracket just so I can be like, yeah, this is helping my bracket. But at the same time, I care so much less about doing well in a pool if my team is in. And my team hasn't been in 3 out of the last 4 years, so I haven't had to care.
I mean, the best memories, and I remember back, I think this was my junior year of high school, so I was like 17 or 16 at the time. But everybody ended up filling out like brackets at the school, even, and it was even like competitive from that point amongst our friends, and we do it. And I think during like chemistry or whatever that year, we ended up watching games while doing homework or assignment, and it was up on like the big jumbotrons projector, whatever ideas, smart board, whatever you want to call it now. But that's what you ended up having,
Yep.
and we ended up watching all those games, and it was always I've been close a couple times in getting that perfect first round right. Like I've gotten, I think like the ESPN bracket challenge, you need 360 to get that perfect first round. I
Yep.
think I got like 350 was my total, or like 340. I only got 2 games wrong. And like
Yep.
in the past, like I've been like the 300 area or so, but I never have been close enough to have that perfect first round. But I feel like if you get that perfect first round and you could get it right from there, I've gotten the first part right. It's just the second part later on in the bracket. That's when everything goes south.
It
And
just goes
anytime that I could
haywire.
win, yeah, and like anytime I could win, that could have been however much money, and it's getting the wrong champions at times. I think one year
Yep.
it was UConn, and I was completely wrong with that, and that was I think UConn versus Villanova.
Yep. I missed when Villanova won. I've missed a bunch, and it's so hard. I mean, people don't realize how difficult like the odds of getting a perfect bracket are
It's
so absurd.
impossible.
It
Yeah,
is actually impossible. If somebody ever does it, it's pure luck.
and it's just clicking, and like I've even tried that too. Like I've just clicked teams and just clicked shit just to see, and I'm like maybe this will be the one that ends up being it, and I've
Flip a
done
coin.
that version, and I've done like my own bracket. Like you said, you could fill out 8 brackets. I'll do one throwaway. I'll just guess on everything and just click what numbers I think are coming to me first or what teams I like better, and just going from there. And then obviously, when you get later on and later on, it's just absolutely ridiculous. There's no
You
way.
got to
There's
do
so
the
many
bracket.
upsets.
You got to do the bracket where you decide which mascot would kill the other mascot.
What
So like
was
Will
UMBC's?
I don't know what they are.
See,
But
but nobody would have had that one. It's impossible.
like you've got the I'm trying to think of some like really good ones. You've got like
The
the bowl,
Devils, the Duke Devils,
right?
Blue Devils,
Like there's a blue devil, which I don't even know what a blue devil is, but does
and the
that
Notre Dame Irishman.
right? Like does the fighting Irishman have a chance against a bear? No.
Well, I think so because
Bear
he's the
wins.
Fighting Irishman. It's in his name.
Yeah, but the bear wins. Bears beat people, and then you have like the Cavaliers, right? Does
Yep,
the Cavalier have a sword? You can have a lot of fun with that.
I like that. We might end up doing that sometime. Either so, stay tuned. Depending on how this week goes, if we do it this time during this week at some point, to end up maybe doing a live stream of a bracket that we end up filling out together and just there's a way that in Streamlabs or whatever broadcasting or StreamYard that we end up using this broadcasting platform, you could do picture in picture too, even if we have
Right.
like an actual setup to it. So we could end up doing
Put the
live
mascots
filling
next
out
to
the
each other.
bracket. Yeah, and it'll be just okay. In reality, who do you think a majority would rule? That would be really fun. I like
That'd
that
be a
idea.
good time. That's a good time.
And then obviously week by week break it down. And you could do
Right.
so many things that like that. You know the guys from that effing sports show we talked about them before.
Yep.
They end up doing the fantasy football like the reality standpoint. That if you end up getting like certain circumstances that the guy you drafted first overall or your first pick, you have to sit him because that's the wild card that your opponent picked or whatever.
Right.
And you're kicked out of the draft house and everything. Great material, great stuff from them guys on a side
Yep.
tangent. One more side tangent too as well. Shout out to Uncle Joe the Black Bookie and shout out to the Snooze You Lose podcast. Uncle Joe the Black Bookie will end up taking care of any single game locks or at least giving you the lock of the day. Stay tuned with him. Snooze You Lose podcast. Great guy. Any sports bets? And again, that's at Uncle Joe the Black Bookie on Twitter as well. But as we were talking about fantasy football, I got distracted because I ended up bringing them that effing.
March
I
Madness.
brought up them effing guys.
Right.
But looking at the bracket from earlier, though, you have Duke versus Oral Roberts, so you were right there. You have these were just a couple of matchups that caught my eye. Tennessee versus Louisiana. I think Tennessee was a 4 seed and Louisiana's 13.
Yep.
Florida Atlantic versus Memphis. I think that's a 9-8 matchup. And this one, I think you have to end up picking the first one. I'm going to say I think it only makes sense. But the Michigan State Spartans versus Southern California or Southern Cal.
Yep.
I don't. Southern Cal isn't a basketball school. Like that's the school I've never really heard of. I think Michigan
Well,
State. If I have to pick between those guys, and I think that's also that another 8 or 4. No,
so
that might have been a 2 versus
USC
11.
had
What's the step above that?
OJ Mayo back in the day, right? That's where OJ Mayo went, was USC.
I think so.
Yeah. So I mean, they've had jumps. I mean, it's the same as like.
Wait, is that Southern Cal? Holy shit, you're right. USC, Evan Mobley.
Yeah. So I mean, they haven't been bad.
It's just when it comes to tournament time, though, too, for Southern California, USC Trojans. I mean, that's a good matchup though to pick for your bracket: a Spartan versus a Trojan.
Spartan versus a Trojan.
That not sponsored, by the way.
No, unfortunately,
not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. But I think in that like Deadliest Warrior show, the Spartans won, so I'd have to go with them. But
kind of where I was.
Spoiler alert! I think I know where I'm going on that one. But I think I was reading an article today about how there's some kind of wonky things going on in the teams that got selected. So of the Colgate, right? So Colgate won their conference and their conference. So in these low seeds, the teams that have come in first or second in their conference tend to actually do really well in the first round. And this year, it's 6 of the 8 bottom seeds are conference winners or something absurd. So they're just setting it up that things are going to get wild, mad, if you will. Yeah, and so I think it's going to be an interesting tournament. And I think the thing is, Houston's really good, Arizona's really good. But you have teams like Gonzaga that are a little bit lower than they normally are. Duke is lower than they normally are. North Carolina's not even in it a year out of being, in the national championship. So you have a lot of parity in college basketball, which is, I think, why people love it. But there's so many teams. You're talking 64 teams. It's going to be fun. I love March Madness. I watch college basketball all year round, so this is just awesome. I'm pumped for the tournament. I love it. I love college basketball.
There's also a fun fact too that it was a source from TikTok for whatever that's worth, but I would believe it with the truth at least. But they were talking about along the lines with March Madness, all those play-in games, how people want to end up getting them removed. If you look at whatever teams that are in that play-in game, they're getting money for their school, whether it be whatever the big pot is. So let's say it's like $250,000, then that's divvied up between whatever schools. And as you advance further and further along in the tournament, you're getting more money for your school. So if you're a play-in game, the reason why you're having that play-in game is so that you still officially have a game, even though it's not out of the round of 64. So
Right.
that money that's for that game, that's the money that's being split for game 66, 67, 68, whatever. I think it's 68 for that, for the play-in games,
Yeah.
because you have four additional teams on top of that. But I mean, that was
Well,
kind of intriguing. And then the later you go on in the bracket, you're getting more and more money. So guys like, who was that? Oral Roberts in the past with Ohio
yep.
State. They made a lot of money because I think that was the playing game they won. Then they won the 64. They won out of the round of 32, and they made it to the Sweet 16. They're banking on that money from years ago, and they could do the same thing again this year. Even.
Right. And what was that team out of Florida that just like
Oh,
took the world by storm?
was it Florida Gulf Coast?
Florida Gulf Coast. Yep.
Yep.
And they went to the Final Four, didn't they?
It was something ridiculous like that. And another one was Iowa State that was up there too. They were kind of ridiculous. Like that was an Elite Eight. And I think they made an appearance in the Elite Eight last year too.
Yeah, they come out of absolutely nowhere, and it's so big and unexpected. One, it helps recruiting. Two, it helps the school financially. These teams have stuff to play for. I mean, especially the players. I mean, if you're from some mid-major school, you're not getting the same looks at the next level as guys that go to Duke and North Carolina and Syracuse and Houston and, Gonzaga, Nova, and all those schools. You come out of, Florida Gulf Coast and light up the NCAA tournament, you help yourself. So these teams at the low levels, the players themselves have a lot to play for.
I mean, look at in the past too, even though he did have, it's not the greatest example, but I think John Morant and Marquette, when they ended up, I think he was a Marquette product, but when they ended up going deeper in that tournament, he was, I think, considered in the draft, but I don't think they were considering him top five at the time until he actually ended up having his play back up what his hype was. And you see that on a national stage. I mean, there's so many times, like you said, that draft stock in a player either elevates a ton or those big schools I think diminishes just because, like a guy from Kent State, for example, that's going to be in the tournament. If one of them's watching right now, shout out to them and good luck. Just because it's an Ohio thing. Congrats, you made it this far. Good luck. Kick some ass if you're a Kent State basketball player.
Keep it rolling.
Keep it rolling, exactly. But even with that, though, if they end up showing out in one game, it's the first round. It could be a 67-65 game, 67-66. They could still lose, but they could be proving a ton of credibility towards themselves afterwards, too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, like, between the conference tournaments and the NCAA championship, you see a lot of players that you normally won't see on, the four-letter network and just not talked about. Schools that aren't talked about. I think it's fun. I mean, there's players that, the big name players everyone's heard of. But there's always some wonky out there player that you see for the first time in the tournament, no matter how much you watch college basketball, who you either fall in love with and you're like, this guy's awesome, or they just have like a lights out performance and you're like, where did this guy come from?
That's like the first name I think of too, and I'm looking it up right now what school this guy went to. But the first name I think of when you end up saying like a crazy school, it was Taco Fall, and he went to UCF. That was that school you were talking about. That was University of Central Florida.
Yeah, he went to Central Florida.
But that was another one too that you ended up seeing him. He made a decent run in the tournament. Wasn't really heard of. Yeah, and he was a 7'7" dude that was just the center. Obviously, right away you're worrying about his knees because he's such a big dude. But he was such like a crazy thing to witness. He's playing over in China right now too. I just saw that.
Yeah, I mean, it was cool to watch.
Speaking of overseas, what's that?
I said it was cool to watch him. Like
absolutely. And I think that's the good thing about any basketball fan or any sports fan with March Madness. That's like we're saying, that's the perfect example. Is these guys that you don't see too often, these guys that do have hype, you're either seeing them live up to it or else you're seeing that they haven't been anything and they've just been overhyped. It
Right.
varies. But I mean,
Yep.
there's even times in the past. I remember Obi Toppin when he was at Dayton, and I just wanted to see him, watch him play because he was possibly a guy that the Cavs could have drafted at the time. That was somebody I wanted
Yep.
the Cavs to draft, and I saw him in March Madness, and that was good enough for an argument for me.
Hey man,
But I'm not in that position.
sixth man of the year, Dion Waiters out of Syracuse.
Dion Waiters. Wow.
Hey,
Why do you
gotta
got to
hype
bring
up,
up the bad memories?
gotta hype up my guys when I see them. You know.
Dion Waiters. Did you go to school with him?
No.
College?
Um.
Uh,
So what's happening overseas? I heard the word
so
overseas.
overseas, yeah, overseas. So today it was announced that Trevor Bauer's playing baseball in Japan now. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, obviously, it was for a 1 year deal, $4 million. We're talking baseball now, just for those of you that are tuning in. But not a terrible deal. But the fact, I think this is just something that if it's an out of sight, out of mind thing, maybe that's what his agent, his representatives, whatever, are thinking. Just stay out of the league because nobody wants you right now. And I think that's just a sour apple to bite into, even just because you have to see that. And he has to relocate, go to Japan, even if it's for a year. You see a lot of talent out there. I mean, you're seeing it right now in the WBC too. I mean, I think it
Yeah.
was what Taiwan or China, 22-2.
Yeah.
So you have the offense out there, you have the firepower. It'll
There's a
just be
lot of
interesting to
firepower.
see how it'll be interesting to see how he succeeds and what it does to him. Because what if he doesn't succeed? He's not coming back to MLB.
I don't know that he's going to come back to MLB anyways. And I have mixed feelings on Trevor Bauer. I think he's getting a much more raw deal than some of the other guys that have been in the league. I don't think what Trevor Bauer did, regarding the DV and all that, he's no what he did is not nearly as bad as what I think Aroldis Chapman did.
Yep.
Aroldis Chapman's involved a gun, and it was like actual domestic violence that everyone knew about, right? Trevor Bowers is a little more in that gray area. I think there's still some argument about what the nature of what he's accused of versus what the girl is saying versus what he's saying. I think there's a lot of ifs out there about Trevor Bauer's situation. I mean, certainly I wasn't there. I think
Right.
it's concerning, but at the same time, I mean, we have guys who have been convicted of these domestic violence things who weren't suspended as long as Trevor Bauer. Um, I'm not sure what led the MLB to blackball him so bad, other than at the same time that all this stuff was going on, he also was going after the league pretty hard on social media on a basically daily basis, calling out
Regarding money.
sticky substances, money. I mean, you
Hmm.
name it. He was blowing the door open on a lot of stuff. I don't think people liked seeing him do that, but he's he was one of the better pitchers in the league at the time that he left Cleveland. He was good in LA. Um, it's kind of unfortunate to see him have to go overseas to make a living in baseball. Um, but $4 million for 1 year to go to Japan, I don't think that's a bad gig. I mean, I think
No.
he's going to be lights out over there. The fans in Japan go crazy for this stuff. They like seeing American players go over there to play. It's so I it might not be the worst gig for him. It might give him a year away from all this craziness. Because even when he's out of the league, things people still talk about him, people still bring him up, people are still talking about it. Maybe it'll be a refresh period, a refresh year for him where he makes a cool $4 million in a league that he probably doesn't care all that much about.
Right. And I think that's kind of exactly where it's at right now too. He's just gonna end up you have to end up working on your craft one way or another. And he's not out of baseball completely, so he's not giving up. I think it's shuffling complicated that you have to end up just seeing it from a competitive perspective that no MLB team wants you right now. And going
Right.
back to what you were saying with his case and what he ended up going through, I think it was just a competition, unfortunately, between the NFL and the MLB, seeing whose is bigger and whose is stronger, pretty much, and how they could throw their weight around to prove a statement.
Yep.
And I think that was kind of the route that it was. And that's why Trevor Bauer, you had Deshaun Watson suspended 13 games, and Trevor Bauer got a year plus, and now he's reinstated a year after Deshaun Watson's already done with his suspension. So what's to even say that that wasn't in their plans this whole entire time to begin with? That
Right.
was just who's going to have the more severe punishment because we have to look good because this is an issue that's important. But they're just millionaires that are caring about money and billionaires that are caring about more and more money, and that's all that they care about. They don't care about the fans. They don't care about people. They don't care about what
No,
happened to Trevor Bauer.
and now it's the leagues are trying to say like it's kind of bizarre, but they're both trying to say like we care about people more, right? I mean, like the Deshaun Watson thing, it didn't matter what came out after the accusations were laid out. It didn't matter what was going to happen. They had to make a statement of we don't like this type of behavior. It could have come out that he did absolutely nothing wrong and he would have been suspended one way or another, right? Because
Hmm.
the accusation goes far enough. Trevor Bauer, he was villainized, like, well, yeah, he became like public enemy number one in the MLB the day the accusations came out. I mean, it was all over every sports website,
And it was a
top to
quick
bottom.
process too.
Trevor Bauer, what are the accusations? Trevor Bauer, you know, accused of doing this, that, and the other thing. Before he was able to make a single statement, he was already labeled as a guy who, had choked out this woman, blah, 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 blah. And then, he brings his cell phone forward. He brings the messages with the girl forward. He brings up the fact that they got together again after the fact. None of that was going to matter. The accusation was going to hurt him one way or another.
And
Um,
that
I don't
that
think he
could be where
handled
he's
it
at
well.
right now.
I don't think he handled it well either because, I think as it went on, um, he continued to like poke the bear at the MLB, and he didn't make himself more likable to anybody. The people who like Trevor Bauer for his personality still were gonna like him. Those people that were on the fence were like, this guy's a jackass. Like
Hmm.
he's the most arrogant jackass in baseball.
Not only just that, he's done this now, and he also ended up cutting his finger with the drone because he was playing with a toy however many years ago in the playoffs, and that's one strike, and now this is your other strike, and
Well, he
good
throws the
enough to be
ball
your
over the
strike
outfield.
three.
He threw the ball over the outfield fence because he was getting pulled. Like the guy's a head
Yep.
case. I mean, he's an absolute head case. Which when these accusations came out, people were like, "Oh, here's a bunch of highlights of Trevor Bauer losing his absolute mind." It wasn't hard to picture him losing his mind in a domestic violence scenario, right? I mean, he painted
Hmm.
himself as a head case, and he is a head case, but it makes things more believable when you paint yourself that way. Like he enjoys being the villain.
Well, I think the thing is too, and this is the last thing I want to hit on Trevor Bauer, and I want to go really brief into the WBC just because it's been really fun to watch so far. But
Oh
with
yeah.
Trevor Bauer, I think he's just such a powerful and smart guy. Because I mean, you've seen it before. You've seen the way that he's talked to the media. He just seems like he's getting you an answer to be. I don't even want to be that guy, but I'm going to be that guy. He's giving you that answer just to be a smart ass, and he's
Yep.
just showing that he's a higher education level than you. Baseball isn't anything he needs. He has an education or whatever background, education and whatever, science, whatever. He's super smart and he's super technology, like everything around the ways of that. He's just kind of better than you, and that's the way he looks at it and carries himself. And he doesn't care if you hate him or not because he's better, he's smarter, he has this, he has money, he has this. What's the matter to him if you hate him?
Right. I mean, he's putting himself in the same category as other players who have been suspended from baseball. I don't care. I'm better than you. What I don't care. Kick me out of the league. What do I don't need this. I mean, at the same time, it makes him look bad, but he doesn't care that he looks bad.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not going to change him at all. And if he does the same thing in Japan, think the downfall is too, as you mentioned it, is that fans love seeing American players over there. If he throws a ball over the center field fence over there, I think fans would enjoy that. They'd encourage it almost just because they never got to see that live. It's different when you see his attitude in person.
I kind of
Something that
enjoyed
could
it.
bite him in the ass.
I mean, I kind of enjoyed it in the first place. Like,
Well, yeah, it was a great meme. It was anything that you could meme over too, that you could just Photoshop his face with chucking the ball 1,000 yards. Not even. I mean, what was
maybe,
that? 200 feet, 250 feet.
yeah. I mean,
Did just
he
like all the
cleared
other balls
center field
leaving the
wall
park
and
that
put it
day.
around.
It was impressive. I'll give
I
him
mean, he
that,
has a
but it was
cannon. He has
disappointing.
a cannon for an arm. I was like, man, this guy could play right field on his days off. Like, if he could hit, he could have played
Right.
more. But
He just had more fun copying stances.
yeah, he's a nutcase. He's just a nutcase.
So next week it's going to be hit on but before we end up going into the WBC, I want to mention for next week, the San Diego Padres ended up having a 16-year-old catcher catch for them during a spring training game. We're going to talk about that next week. It's very intriguing. I mean, you end up looking at it. Drew's had articles before on WeLikeSportsPC.com about the minor leagues and how players should play younger. And usually, that age for minor league players, they're not getting called up to the big leagues and getting opportunities until they're 23 to 26 years old. And 23 is really generous. So, with that being said, and having a 16-year-old that's a catcher that got playing time in a spring training game,
Yep.
very intriguing. Something to hit on next week. And obviously, there's going to be plenty of talk just because it's still fresh news. I think it came out on Sunday. Plenty of time that people are going to end up talking about that. I know that for a fact.
Yep.
But regardless, I have to ask you what your what your thoughts were on Yu Chang hitting a home run. I mean, that was what sucked me into the WBC so far. Was once I saw that home run and the fan atmosphere. I mean, you had cheerleaders on top of the dugout, which was unheard of. You had fans
Yep.
like that's the type of games that baseball is missing. You don't have that fan rowdy atmosphere that everybody's enjoying the game. I mean, KJ is not a part of it, but he was down in Florida. He didn't make it today, but he was down in Florida last week and got to see one of the spring training games. I think it was the Braves against the Dominican Republic he got to see. But Julio Rodriguez got taken out of his at bat before he got to see him take his at bat because the Dominican Republic was kicking ass.
Right. Well, I mean, it's one of those things where I've talked about it enough times in writing. Baseball's solving the wrong problems all the time, right? I mean, the people aren't electrified in the Dominican and Japan and the Caribbean islands where you see the fans go absolutely ballistic over the game.
I mean, you could even mention Puerto Rico too. Look at back in speaking from
Puerto
Indians
Rico,
Guardians
Dominican.
past. You had Francisco Lindor playing, and he had a home run, and it was a Cleveland, I think, away game because it was the Twin Series or whatever. But fans, just because he was a Puerto Rican guy and just one of them, that's what they celebrated with, and that was off of a home run. It sounded like it was a World Series game. It sounded like it was one of the most important games ever.
But here's the thing, like baseball, like the MLB is trying to fix baseball by trying to change the game to fit the modern demographic, right? Like, we need the games faster. We need the games this, that, the other thing. The World Baseball Classic doesn't have the pitch clock. The World Baseball Classic, I don't think they have the bigger bases. They don't have the things that the MLB implemented. But here's the thing. The fans in the Dominican, the fans in Puerto Rico, the fans in Japan are going absolutely hog wild. The stadiums are packed over the game that MLB said people don't want to watch. Well, people do want to watch, but here's the thing. Their stadiums are packed. MLB stadiums aren't. Right? Why aren't they packed? Tickets are expensive. People don't get to watch their team when they're in a local area and the game is blacked out. So MLB is shutting fans out. They won't address it themselves because they want the money out of it. But you watch the fans in these other countries going absolutely crazy. They're watching the game under the rules the MLB decided to change. So the rules aren't keeping those fans away. Why are they keeping our fans away? Right? I mean, it's a whole thing to explore. And I'm not sure there's ever going to be a good answer. I think baseball has a lot of, it's a weird sport because you do have like the old guard people who don't want anything fun. They hate bat flips, they hate celebrations, they want retaliation for those things. They want a pitcher to throw at the guy's head after he celebrates a long home run. They want the jawing and all that stuff, but they don't want bigger bases and pitch clocks. So you have that stuff. Then on the other hand, you have the MLB who's trying to address this, where they highlight all the bat flips, they highlight the celebrations, they do all this stuff, but the tickets are still expensive. The concessions are still expensive. They still black out a whole bunch of games. What are the odds that you're going to see the bat flip on TV? Not very high, because MLB has decided that you can't watch baseball unless you pay
Unless
them
if it's a playoff game. Unless if it's a playoff game, you might catch it, or social media, Twitter, whatever it may be. That's the only time you're seeing a bat flip. I mean, look at Oscar Gonzalez with the Guardians with beating, I think, Tampa Bay in that 15-inning game. Huge bat flip, but you had to get the right camera angle, and they eventually on social media, you couldn't find that replay with that bat flip just because he's a young kid. He bat flipped. Is he maybe a problem? Is he the next attitude problem? Is he the next Yoenis Cespedes? Is he the next Tatis? Whatever it may be. There's so many different aspects. And the thing that I don't like about it either is you ended up mentioning the fact that MLB is taking away from MLB fans. And the thing is with the WBC, what I like about it is look at Team USA and look at Team Dominican Republic. All those guys are MLB guys. It's the guys that like Yu Chang's playing for. I forgot which area, but like you have a mixture of guys that play in the MLB and guys that are absolutely nobodies that nobody cares about besides their hometown guys. And those are the guys that are important. I mean, Team Mexico, I think last night beat Team USA, but nobody talked about that because what's that?
It was like 11-5. It was like a beat.
Yeah. And it's a beatdown, and everybody from Team USA had high expectations. Every USA fan had high expectations because they have a good team on paper, but that's on paper.
Yeah, they're stacked. They're stacked.
You have these young guys that have nothing to lose. That's where you see the best type of baseball. And that's why I'm a big advocate for the WBC. Now seeing the World Baseball Classic happen, all those games are worth watching no matter what. If you have any ounce of time whatsoever, even looking at the highlights just to get you into baseball, if you're a non-baseball fan, watch that first. And last thing I want to hit on regarding MLB is something for next week to hit on, just because it's kind of worrisome if you're a baseball fan, especially within the Cleveland area. But they're talking about Bally Sports going bankrupt by the time we do the show next week. So by the time March 20th comes around next week, we're talking about Bally Sports being bankrupt, but the MLB is going to take care of it. They're going to take care of all broadcasts. Who's in that booth? Is that Rick Manning? Is that Matt Underwood? Or is that MLB announcers? Because Cleveland people don't want to hear MLB guys. Everybody's going to turn on Hammy afterwards just because they don't want to deal with the national disrespect that they go through all the time. Look at against New York. You heard it all the time. Cal Quantrill's a nobody. Josh Naylor was Josh Naquin. Like, that's Tyler Naquin. It's not even related. Yeah. Come on, man.
But the other side of it, too, is MLB is notoriously bad at giving fans access to games. So, okay, Bally Sports goes out, right? So now, if there was just no Bally Sports, there's no way to watch the games. So MLB says, don't worry, we'll take care of it. For the low price of $19 a month, you can buy the MLB package, and we'll ensure that you can watch all the Indians games.
Yeah,
just wait. Just wait until it's going to be on some random cable package that nobody has, and then the fans are going to go ballistic again that they have to pay money to watch something that they had access to the day before.
Yep, and you're going to lose more and more baseball fans the way you do that just because they want extra money. It's all about that. All the billionaire owners, regardless MLB, NFL, NBA, it's all about money in the long run, and money talks and shit walks. And I guess that's the way we're going to close today's show. That's the best way to.
Right.
But before we end up going, Drew, shout out to you for sticking around today. He's been the number one. Drew, follow him on social media. Look at his articles on WeLikeSportsPC.com. Drew, what's your social media?
At Forest City Sport on Twitter.
All right, perfect. And also check out his articles. Like I said, he has three different pieces so far. A fourth one coming, I think, for baseball rules and changing baseball eventually. What he wants to do. Make sure to follow me on social media. I can't speak. Like if I do sometimes, I come out with a southern aspect. I almost said media, like I had a
Hell yeah,
southern
brother.
twang. But follow me on social media, Twitter specifically at Peyton Vince. Follow the podcast account at We Like Sports PC. And guys, thanks for sticking around and listening to us today. If you missed the live version on video formats, make sure to check us out tomorrow morning, Tuesday at 8 a.m. Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher. And if you're checking us out on YouTube, there it is again.
You're
Make
doing
sure
all
to
right.
subscribe to us.
Been a
Make
long
sure to
day.
give us a subscription.
Hey, random Indians player, Niger Morgan.
Ooh, Niger Morgan. I'll go with what was the Jason Michaels.
There you go. All right.
That
Okay.
that there you go, CJ and Casey. You got to step up your game next week. I said Jason Michaels. There's
Hey.
another one too. I got one for next week.
I prepped for that one question.
Hey,
So-
I'm glad you did. I was ready for it. Who was it again?
Niger Morgan.
Okay. I forgot that was 2016 or 2015.
Yeah, and he had that crushing knee injury, but he was really
Yeah,
he was solid before that.
The Guardians, the Indians didn't get any of him outside of
Nope.
spring training and I think opening day roster, and that was about it.
Yeah, I'm
But
gonna try and like name people that played like 8 games for the Indians.
perfect. That's why I
Yeah.
went with Trent Nixon not too long ago. A guy that completely is forgotten about that he was a Cleveland guy. Most people remember him for being a Boston guy.
Right. Yeah. Oh,
But-
I'm gonna dig deep.
Oh, I'm
Since I didn't grow
concerned.
up watching it, I'm just gonna dig deep.
Well, Drew, thanks again for hanging out today.
All
You've
right,
been
bro.
listening to the We Like Sports podcast. Check us out next week, 7 to 8 o'clock, live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and live on all podcast platforms as well. And make sure to check out our website, and we'll catch you next week.
See ya.